you consent to being part of the recording by being in the seminar. We ask that you stay muted and you turn your video off during the presentation, but that you turn your videos back on for the Q&A because it's just much nicer to see people's faces. Please feel free, the chat function will be live throughout the talk, so please feel free to use it to jot down a emoji of joy, a question as you think of it, or just general cheers and celebrations. After the talk, you'll be called on to unmute yourself and state your question, but you can also type it into the chat and one of us can read it out for Sophie to answer. And other than that, I think there is no, I was just vamping a little to make sure everyone has a chance to get in. And checking the chats. We are coming in from France and Paris, lots of Paris, and Cambridge, England. I am in Bristol. We've got people from all over. So welcome, good morning or good evening, depending on where you're joining from. And now that we are mostly in, I'm going to begin the recording and then have the absolute pleasure to turn over to fellow ODSECS convening team, Bethany Qualls.
Okay, I think we are recording. Yeah, Nish, we're good.
Yes, we're recording.
Great. So thank you all for coming. This is so great. I'm so excited to hear Sophie today. So I met Sophie at the American Society of 18th Century Studies annual conference in the spring of 2022. She was a visiting scholar at Northeastern University in Boston, and it was because of her shoes. It was definitely an ODSECS shoes moment, but it was in real life instead of social media. They're really good shoes. Now I own Blundstones thanks to her. At the time, I literally only knew one other 18th century scholar in France, and throughout the whole, oh, you don't happen to know Gambit. And they did, in fact, know each other. And Sophie was actually a member of the French Annex of Write with Afra, an online writing group that was started by Afrabet Online in 2020, and that I was partially responsible for continuing with Kirsten Saxton. So it was, in fact, a small world after all. Sophie has been a vital part of my own journey into French academe, generous with her knowledge, time, and good humor, even when juggling the many projects and responsibilities that being so competent seems to inevitably attract. I mean, she's even running a theater workshop in English for like 20 years. Where does she even find the time? Sophie's research into spa culture is so thorough, you can almost smell the sulfur and other trace minerals in the water. Author of multiple books and articles that explore the intersections of health history and English literature, Sophie really digs into the depths of her subject matter. I mean, she even co-edited a collection with Rebecca Ann Barr and Sylvie Kyman-Lafton called Bellies, Bowels, and Entrails in the 18th Century for Manchester University Press in 2018. Sophie was an assistant professor at the Université Paris-Cité until 2021. And then she moved to become a professor of British Studies at the Université de Montpellier-Paris-Vallée, where she's a member of the Institut de Recherche sur la Renaissance, l'Âge classique et les Lumières. Her most recent monograph, Murky Waters, British Spas in 18th Century Medicine and Literature from 2022, gives, according to its review in the Journal of 18th Century Studies, a, quote, substantial and expansive account of both the scale of spa culture and wealth of writing that spas generated in the long 18th century. Today, she'll be sharing narratives of spa discoveries, covering who, how, and where, as well as sharing more about the notions of serendipity and wonder and how they function in this microgenre. Please join me in welcoming Sophie and her talk today, entitled Oak Galls, Pigeons, and Brandy, Discovery Narratives of Mineral Springs in 18th Century Britain.
Thank you so much, Bethany, for this very generous introduction. That's really nice of you. And thank you for all the ODSECS organizers for inviting me. This is really nice, and I'm really happy to share this obsession of mine about spa discovery narratives. I'm going to share my PowerPoint, if that's okay. And you can tell me, I can't see what's written in the chat, so maybe if there's a problem or something, can I count on you, Bethany, or on Nush to just interrupt me and let me know that something's wrong? Yeah. Uh, um, can you see?
Looks great. You look great.
Okay, thank you. All right, so as Bethany said, this paper stems from my research in 18th century spas, which has been the focus of the last 5 years. I did write a book on spa in 18th century Britain. It was published 2 years ago, and I have also expanded the field of my research into France and Europe. And such a field requires a lot of dedication. I have been committed to trying out the mineral waters in France and in Europe, from Vichy to Barège and Harrogate. I have compared the taste of sulphurous and saline waters and the warmth of their bath. Unfortunately, this groundbreaking groundbreaking archaeological survey of the uses of waters was delayed by the COVID pandemic, but this gave me enough time to read enough touristic boards to realize the importance of the original narrative of mineral waters. The circumstances of their discovery are regularly told along the happy accident paradigm in micronarratives that were inserted in medical treatises, travel accounts, and visitors' guidebooks. This is why I am now focusing on the narratives of spa discoveries within the scope of one of the outcomes of the project, entitled Writing Doctors, which you might have followed. This project was led at the University of Northumbria in the UK by Clark Lawler, Lee Wetherill Dixon, and Helen Williams. And I will be presenting some of my hypotheses on these spa discovery narratives today, and it should be published in one of the future volumes that are linked to the project on the notion of rewriting medicine. But there is still time to change things in my article, so I will be very happy to hear your reactions, criticism, as there is time to make adjustments. A few words before on spa, springs and wells in 18th century Britain. I have been focusing on therapeutic mineral waters, and that encompasses a great diversity of phenomena, from the local spring or well to the most organized spa town, which were all comprised under the term spa. Because of the predominance of baths in the historiography, I have tried to veer away from this model and observe all other spas that have been visited, used, and written about in a medical context. Mineral waters were part of the materia medica of the time, that is to say, the medicine cabinet, and subject to the same ambivalent medical writing, some promotional, some analytical, and with some overlap between the two. So if we study the distribution of spa in Britain in the long 18th century, as shown on these two maps, one original on the right and the other one which I made on the left, with different types of spas with their sizes, we realized that most people had a small spa, at least within very reasonable traveling distance, less than a day, and no more than 2 days distance to a medium size spa. Mineral water treatment was therefore much more available to the public than the focus on glamorous pump room scenes had like Bath would have us believe. Nonetheless, many of these smaller spas strived to gain recognition and received more visitors, which led to the publication of some various medical, touristic, or miscellaneous entertaining publications, sometimes even called miscellaneous. In this paper, I would like to see what the narrative of spa discovery tells us about the cultural relationship between medicine and the environment in 18th century Britain, and I will focus specifically on the agents of the discovery and the setting staged by the medical or touristic voice. And I will follow this outline alongside 4 types of narratives. First, the failed recipe or ruined recipe paradigm, then animal instinct and discovery, to then turn to the inference and women's knowledge, and then ending on the treasure paradigm. So let's start with the ruined recipe paradigm. Sometimes the presence of minerals in the water was revealed by the chemical reaction induced by cooking. In 1747, William Hillary, a Quaker doctor and a pupil of Borov, who had moved to Bath in the hopes of developing his practice, published a treatise on Lincoln Spa, which is near Bath. And the treatise opens up on the discovery narrative. The mineral water, which is the subject of the following essay, owes its discovery to the following accident. One Charles Melsom, a cooper, having some laborers at work near the place where this water springs, treated them one day with a bowl of punch, made this water and some brandy, which had been kept in an oaken cask. The punch quickly changed to a blackish purple color, which so surprised the workmen that some of them refused to drink it. He told this to a neighbor of his, which acquainted me with the accident, for which I readily judged it to be a chalybeate water, and sometimes after, going to see the spring, I presently found from its smell and taste, and a few slight experiments, that it was so, but that it differed very much in several aspects from every other spring of that kind which I had hitherto seen. Hilary's focus on the accidental nature of the original discovery is an early example of the notion of the happy accidents, which will later be perceived as a trigger of scientific discoveries. The punch recipe served to the laborers is written in a pleasant scene of community work with a space for a break, an alternative actually to the pastoral narratives we will later examine. The disgust expressed by the laborers, however, as well as a blackish purple color, is a sign of the general caution with waters and liquids in a context in which sensory examination was usually the sole measuring rod to evaluate edibility. Hilary's conclusion to the story is that of a secular and serendipitous chemical reaction, making the spectacle of chemistry visible to the common people, yet decipherable only by an expert, that is to say, himself. This expertise will yield profit as he soon invests in the water, as stated by his biographer, and starts a business which benefits from the proximity of Bath. So this is a perfect example of what one of the scholars, Adrien Sonnet, called a co-petition that developed amongst spa owners. That is to say that being in proximity to each other actually encouraged business, but also encouraged competition between the different spas. William Hillary is insistent on his own expertise, and this is a recurrent trope of medical treatises, unsurprisingly. But sometimes no water doctor was around to identify the mineral waters, and they remain unexploited until their effect had been properly assessed. This was the case in another failed recipe, according to John Hemming, a physician most probably hired to write a treatise for the waters discovered in Gloucester. The waters were known to the previous proprietor of this house, Hemming explained, but neither he nor his daughter warned the buyer of that when the house was sold. The new landlady was frustrated with the water, as I quote, "The linen was washed therein, was spoiled, and the water when boiled for tea, used in brewing and other culinary purposes, produced such disagreeable effects as to defeat the intention for which it was used." Punch, again, was no better. Upon mixing it with brandy, observe that a much higher color and an appearance totally different from mixing the same with ordinary water were produced, from which circumstance she never used it afterwards, but obtained water from another part of town. Brandy was regularly used to reveal the presence of minerals in the water, actually. Hemming, whose work focused solely on the Gloucester Spa and was thus not identified as a water doctor, ends his discovery narrative with a new one as Epiphany, or the last chance therapy for his wife. After he had lived some time on the premises, his wife, who had long labored under nervous complaints, attended with a variety of symptoms, such as dejection of spirits, languor, and having applied to medical men of note in Bristol, Bath, and Gloucester without success, and at last determined to try the effect of this water, and in a few weeks her complaints greatly abated. Although the owner's wife is not a case study per se, she embodies the first cure, a sort of patient zero through whom the water's healing faculties are revealed. This little anecdote belongs to another category of narrative constructed as small scenes of serendipity, where the mundane acts of life are disrupted by the sudden misalliance of water and edible and drinkable products. And the efficacy of mineral waters could also be revealed through violent symptoms, as sure sign of water's healing property, as what hurt you temporarily could potentially improve your health. Such was the story of the black mutton leg boiled in the Holt waters. Again, a discovery narrative. The first discoveries of these waters at Holt was merely accidental in the following manner. About 40 years ago, one of the inhabitants of Holt, sinking a well near his house, opened a spring about 11 feet deep, which plentifully supplied him with water of his new well, and soon after expecting a visit from some of his relation, he brewed a barrel of ale with the water of this new well. This is quite common at the time. In fact, I saw that ODSECS was organized by the University of Bristol. Bristol hot wells were used, the waters were used to brew beer as well, originally. And that beer was used for therapeutic purposes, same as we will see with Sadler's Wells in London. I'm closing the parenthesis here. So a barrel of ale to entertain his friends with, and for their better reception, a joint of mutton was got ready and boiled in the same water. But when the meat came to be set on the table, it appeared so discolored and of such a sooty hue that he was almost ashamed to set it before his guest. However, they sat down to their repast, and hunger being their source, they ate plentifully and drank freely. But in a little time, the mineral waters began to exert its operation, and they all found themselves sick of the same disease. Everyone complained of a flux for a considerable time. Just like Gloucester and Lincoln, the Holt waters were not far from Bath, and the owners hoped for economic and medical spin-offs from the proximity of such famous water, since many patients moved from one spot to another when the waters were not deemed efficacious. Here again, the cooking process is on a continuum between culinary recipes and chemical experiments, which, as Simon Werrett has explained, were not strictly separated, since the kitchen would often double up as a laboratory. The sudden purge exerted by the waters is what most patients sought, actually, in a drinking cure, as was sometimes explicitly caricatured for famous purging waters rich in salt, such as Cheltenham, offering multiple satirical representations that actually echo the farcical tone of this narrative. I will now turn to the second category of discovery narratives, animal instinct and discovery. Still in the Midlands, about a day's walk from Neville Holt, the town of Stratford-upon-Avon had its own mineral waters. Yes, it did. They were analysed in 1743 by the Canterbury-based Dr. Charles Berry, also an author of travel narratives, who published an account of an analysis made on the Stratford mineral waters. The treatise calls for a substantial investment from the town corporation, proving the efficacy of the waters. The animals did not refuse to drink the waters, they feasted on their minerals. So I'm quoting here from Perry's treatise. This mineral spring was discovered, 'tis true, some years ago, but it has not been much resorted to, nor its virtues scarcely thought of, till within 15 months past. It owed its first discovery to the frequent resort of pigeons to it, the neighbouring country people, and some person of Stratford, of better sense and discernment perhaps, observing the great resort of pigeon twits, resolved to go and examine it, imagining it might have something singular in it, that is to say, some peculiar virtue and qualities. They were soon strengthened, if not confirmed, in their conjecture, for on trying it with scrapings of gall, they found it received a purple tincture. This proved at last some medicinal quality in it, and this, in process of time, induced several persons, invalids, to make trial of it in their respective distempers. No one is singled out, and in this narrative, the country people share a common interpretative skill on animal behavior. In the same manner, these country people master the gall experiment. We'll come back to it, but oak gall was a common parasite of trees, which has long been used in ink preparations and was used in the chemical analysis of the waters, and is usually the first experiment described by water doctors. The purple color cannot be strictly interpreted by the country people, who infer the presence of mineral and then move on to the next step, the treatment trial. Incidentally, the pigeons are emblematic on another town, Cheltenham, equal in fame at the end of the 18th century to Epsom during the Restoration. John Rutty's entry on the Cheltenham water in his methodical synopsis, which is a huge treatise comparing all the mineral waters he could find in Britain, so Ireland, England, and some comparison with the continents as well. So in his methodical synopsis published in 1757, before the spa became famous, already recorded the pigeon story. It is said to have been discovered by the water being casually evaporated by the heat of the sun and thereby leaving a white salt which the pigeons flock to eat. Phyllis Humbry, whose book The English Spa remains one of the most comprehensive social history of the British spas in the 18th century, records an alternative origin and calls the pigeon version a legend. Rutty's brief account shows that the story was well established 30 years after the spa became advertised. It was further developed in a travel guide entitled A Tour to Cheltenham Spa, written by the Master of Ceremonies, Simon Morrow. So they were just like Bonash in Bath and Tunbridge. Simon Morrow was organizing ceremonies and supervising balls and gaming in the spa. And he wrote this guidebook, initially published in 1783 and then republished in 1788, right on time for the royal visit of George III. The two sculptures of pigeons you can see on this slide came from an art project launched by the city of Cheltenham in honor of the role played by the birds in the discovery of their waters. As you can see on the left, a pigeon stands proudly in the city's 19th century coat of arms, making the town identity as a spa central to its development. So the Cheltenham story belonged to a subcategory of narrative in which animals are, as I said, agents of discovery. And Simon Morrow narrates his story thus. This water owes its discovery to a slow spring being observed to ooze from under the sandy soil, which after spreading itself a few yards upon the surface disappeared, leaving much of its salt behind, to feed on which flocks of pigeons daily coming induced Mr. Mason, the then proprietor of the ground, to take more particular notice of it, where it was further remarked that in hard frosty weather, when other springs were fast bound, this alone continued in its fluid state. The pigeons, therefore, they enhance the minerality of the waters. They do not drink, they eat elements of the waters which have been solidified, making visible what is otherwise diluted in the Cheltenham waters. Many stories, therefore, help to visualize the minerals to differentiate common water from mineral water. of course, from Perry here to Simon Morrow, we have an example of the rewriting process of medicine that circulates between, yes, medical treatises, but also advertising spa treatises, which were focusing on one spa specifically, and taking the same motive as the one that could be found in another spa. That being said, Morrow himself does not only focus on the pigeon story for Cheltenham. He's talking about another discovery narrative with another type of animal. And I quote from Simon Morrow, "Others again say that the virtues of this water were first shewn on a horse which grazed there, and by drinking at this place and rolling himself in the grass where the spring oozed out, was cured of a violent humour and the disorders he laboured under. Even some gentlemen give it their horse that have any humour, they drink it willingly, and usually receive benefit from it." This version fits the medical context of the time, as the Cheltenham waters were well known for their saline purging immediacy, and horses, dogs, and cattle were regularly treated with mineral waters and various purges to fight off parasites. Yet the animal discoveries add, I think, a spiritual layer that can be read through the lines. First of all, it partakes of a naturalistic understanding of medicine, such as the one we might find in Wesley's Primitive Physic. Animals would have a more acute sense of what's available in nature to cure their own ailments. Secondly, the happy discovery of animals is reminiscent of ancient spiritual narrative in which, for example, animals bow to the kings or saints, and the recognition of the healing properties of the waters by animals inscribe these properties in a wider and divinely designed order of things in which underground resources heal the properties overground. Even though this story is written long after the Reformation, it could be seen as reminiscent of the long history of miracles, which is tied to spa discoveries in the inheritance of holy wells, of course. This narrative could also, let's be creative, be seen as a trans-species collaboration in the construction of knowledge, in which animals, as the leaders of our discoveries, are acknowledged as such by 18th century contemporaries whose proximity to animal life might have integrated them to observational strategies rather than only objects of experiment. There are many other examples. The most well-known, of course, which you've been probably thinking about all this time, is King Bladud's hogs in Bath. And Tiffany Stern gave a lovely account of that narrative with a very interesting analysis in the book that I'm presenting here, Spa Culture and Literature in England. From the cattle refusing to drink the Epsom waters to the goats eating the moss around the Scottish spa of Moffat, the happy accidents of animal discovery could only be used for human benefits because of the observation and sagacity of the onlookers, of course. Now, I would like to turn to, do I still have time? I haven't. Okay. So I would like to turn to the third type of narrative, inference and women's knowledge. In many cases, doctors are only sent for after a local observer realizes that the water is mineral and tries it out on animals, family, and friends. In the previous cases, the local observer was the owner, but quite regularly, the discovery is made by a woman, as it is portrayed by one of the most well-known water doctors at the time, together with Ruti, whom I just mentioned, Thomas Short, who wandered through Yorkshire and the neighbouring counties to record all the spas, springs, and wells he could find. His account of the discovery of Scarborough Spa starts with a walk along the cliff. So I quote from Thomas Short. The spa, which he says was discovered about 1620 by one Mrs. Farrow, a charitable and physically disposed gentlewoman of good repute who lived in the town and sometimes walking that way, observed the stones in the watercourse of the russet tincture. And finding the water have an acid taste different from common spring water, and observing that galls gave it a purple color, she imagined it had some medicinal quality, and both drank of it herself and advised her neighbor to it, and found it opened the belly and strengthened the body and cured some distempers. Thus, it first became the common physic of the inhabitants, then it quickly gained reputation in the neighborhood. In few years, its fame reached Hull. After that, our author went yearly to Hull and carefully informed himself of the nature and effects of the waters on its drinkers, often recommended it to its patients in sundry cases. So, the story, originally told in the previous century, attracts short attention, and he mentions it in a long footnote, actually, in History of the Spa. As in many other cases, Short's narrative revolves around the agency of the observer and her sensation. She spots the russet color, she tastes the water, checks its internal progress. Clearly, Mrs. Farrow has a respectable degree of medical expertise. She actually performs the oak gall test. And so this is a picture of an oak gall. I did a little video where I showed what the oak gall test was doing in several types of mineral waters. So she prescribes the water to her neighbor who confide in her for medical advice. She therefore behaves as a natural historian and healthcare provider, and her action is rewarded by local and regional fame, even though the one recording the story is the institutional voice of a male doctor. Mrs. Farrow's sagacity, her ability to infer mineral presence from her observation and make the most of unexpected discoveries is echoed by other women in Glastonbury and elsewhere whose relationship to healing waters was based on observation and experiment. In this case, the combination of happy accident and sagacity does not require pre-existing institutional expertise. It can be rooted in individual knowledge, and the fact that Mrs. Farrow is credited for her discovery is a sign that a common knowledge about common physics is shared and acknowledged by more people than just the restricted circle of institutional physicians. Finally, I would like to end on the treasure paradigm. So I would like to examine this paradigm. Waters are found while digging in the ground, and very often many new mineral springs are found around mines and collieries where the earth abounds in various minerals. This is the case at the turn of the 19th century for a new water near Durham. And I quote, "It was found by workmen that dug in that place for coal. When they were, when they were 12 fathom and a half deep, they discovered this treasure of natural physics, which may be as good to the people as when they sought for the coal be a commodity very necessary and beneficial in these parts." The author William Clanny, whose eagerness to support the newly found mineral waters might be betrayed by the treasure analogy, but he puts his finger on a major aspect in the history of mineral waters. They represent a natural resource to be extracted and exploited, just like coal, copper, or iron. Clanny mixes the basic ingredients of the serendipity recipe, what you find when you're busy looking for something else. Life is, I guess, what's happening when you're busy making other plans, together with the treasure found in the cellar paradigm. These narratives highlight the exploitative relationship to mineral waters. Rather than a free common good or the common physic described in Scarborough, Clanny describes them as a potential fortune maker. Or to paraphrase one of my beloved sentences by Jane Austen in her unfinished novel Sanditon, it was his mine, his lottery, his speculation, and his hobby horse. It's unfinished, his occupation, his hope, and his futurity. End of quote. This lovely speculative sally shows that Austen highlights the exploitative nature of medical investigation in healing water and how a common resource, water, is turned into a potential profitable business because of extra medical value. Perhaps one of the most explicit stories, treasure stories relative to mineral waters is the narrative of Sadler's Wells. So I haven't been able to visit Sadler's Well because you need to have a ticket for the theatre to be able to see the top of the spa. And I haven't had a chance to go to the theatre yet, but it's, of course, it's something I will do in the coming years. I don't have the time to give the full quote here, but Thomas Giddot gives an account of the discovery at the end of the 17th century. Two fellows were hired by one Mr. Sadler in Islington to dig gravel. When they had dug pretty deep, one of them found his pickaxe strike upon something that was very hard, whereupon he endeavored to break it, but could not, whereupon thinking himself that it might peradventure be some treasure hid there, he uncovered it very carefully and found it to be a broad-hat stone, which having loosened and lifted up, he saw it was supported by 4 oaken posts, and had it under a large well of stone arched over and curiously carved. And having viewed it, he called his fellow labourer to see it likewise, and asked him whether they should fetch Mr. Sadler and show it to him. Who, having no kindness for Sadler, said, no, he should not know it, but as they had found it, so they would stop it up again and take no notice of it, which he that found it consented to at first, but after a little time he found himself, whether out of curiosity or some other reason I shall not determine, strongly inclined to tell Sadler of the well, which he did one Sabbath day in the evening. This urban narrative about the origin of Sadler's Wells highlights the relationship between information and power. After the happy accident has been analyzed and understood by the sagacious laborer, the circulation of information remains in his hands. Thomas Giddot, who mastered literary skills and had been largely trained by the writing of several treatises and biographies, chooses to focus on the dispute between the two laborers, thus showing how economic and personal interests could interfere with scientific opportunities. Covering up the treasure and remaining silent is also emblematic of the obscurantism at work, probably tainted with a cultural bias against the Catholic heritage of the Holy Wells, which should be kept underground. And yet, Sadler's response, building a beer garden, a water garden, and a theatre in the end, which, as I mentioned, is still active today in Islington, is a sign of the persistence of Catholic inheritance of thaumaturgic waters in the 18th century, as miracles can be rewritten, perhaps in serendipity. And that is my concluding narrative. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sophie. That was so great. So we're going to open it up for questions. You can use the hand raise function. You can raise your hand. You can put your question in the chat. I will give you all a moment to collect your thoughts. Maybe take a drink of water. Seems apropos.
I didn't know about the spa in Iceland. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
everyone likes beer, apparently. That seems to be a through line here. JP, go for it.
All right, good. Can you hear me? So I love the talk. I love the talk. And it's kind of a baggy question, which is why I waited to see if someone had a narrower one. Because insofar as I understand what you're doing, you've read a ton of these spa narratives and you've found 4 broad classes, right? And that's kind of what we're looking at here. These are the 4 broad classes in which they fall. And so I have 2 questions about those classes. First, tell me about the exceptions, the narratives that don't fall in any of those 4 classes. Have you seen any? Because those will be interesting. And second, I'm very, very curious about the animal discovery ones, and if you see a relationship between the animal fable. I'm thinking about like Boyle and occasional meditations and like the weird religiosity of animals moving in and out of it. And like there's some of that with the pigeons, like health, like we look to the animals, they teach us. So those are kind of 2 baggy ones, which you're welcome to reject. But
Okay, we'll come back to perhaps to the animal one because I'm not sure I understood all your question on the animal. But so the 4 broad classes are examples, but they're not, this is not comprehensive. I need to do an inventory, and that's the problem with spas, is that you keep like doing inventories. And what I have done so far in terms of inventories on my study of spa in the 18th century is much more of a geographical inventory and like where they were mentioned, where they were, where they actually mentioned in medical treatises or not. And I found about like a little, I can't remember the number, but about 300 spas in the 18th century. So from very, very small spas lost in the wilderness to bigger spas. So now I need to go through the 300 spas and see if they have discovery narratives. So this is just like first more of an exploratory paper on what some of the narratives could tell us. And I think I focused mostly on the ones that were perhaps more easily told also in like touristic guides, even contemporary touristic narratives and boards that were near the spa. I found that the circulation and the inheritance of the stories was interesting. So it's not systematic yet, and it's not a systematic study. And there, yes, not only are there exceptions, but there are as well other types. One other type is this has been around for a long time, and it was known to the local people until a physician came and realized that the local people did not use this properly because they drank way too much, pints after pint of water, and it was actually quite dangerous to use water in this way. That's a typical type of narrative that you, so there is not the spa discovery aspect. There's not the momentum of the discovery. That's why I did not mention it. The other type of narrative that you would find, it's some kind of acknowledgement, as you find in Sadler's well, that this used to be a holy well. Some of them are rediscovered, but some of them are still active. And one of my favorite places in England is, of course, not England, sorry, in Wales is Holywell, which was Catholic even throughout the 18th century. And it's a lovely place to investigate what Alexandra Walsham has been describing on the kind of negotiations that there were between the Protestant culture and the use of thaumaturgic water that might have some kind of Catholic inheritance. So that's another presentation of the waters, I would say. And Glastonbury is part of that. Glastonbury has some Catholic inheritance And it's the management of the woman in Glastonbury that makes these waters finally acknowledged as like physical mineral waters. So there, I would say what I perhaps avoided in this short paper is all the types of narratives which are not strictly discovery narratives, like with the element of serendipity and surprise. Because I first worked on this paper in the context on the workshop in ODSECS on serendipity. So it was my kind of entry into it. Then I've been obsessed with just these little discovery narratives also because of their touristic use. About animal discovery, I'm not sure of what you said at the beginning. Did you mention Boyle?
Yeah, I can clarify. Sorry. It's a
Yes.
question and it's one, it's just like a really personal interest. So like there are a lot of genres of text that begin with like, I saw an animal and it was doing this strange thing. And then the text can go a couple different ways. Oh, this tells us about God. Oh, I like took all its blood out and put it in another animal and now we know how circulation works. Oh, it's a spa. And so I'm kind of like asking a generic question, which might be unfair and too big, but like how does this
No,
like
no.
animal discovery relate to these other kinds of like I saw an animal in the woods and it was doing something narratives. Does that make sense? More
Yeah.
sense?
No, absolutely. That's why I was trying to say that there is some kind of acknowledgement of, for lack of another term, of co-constructed knowledge, like transspecies co-constructed knowledge, where animals are not just an object of observation, they're a guide to something else. They're guiding us to acquire new types of knowledge. I mean, that's how it's, I think, presented in some of these narratives. And being able to follow the animal and read their behavior, which, you know, seems pretty natural for someone who would have a cow herd who refused to drink the waters. Well, it seems that it's just a way of elaborating knowledge where animals would be allowed some kind of agency, not at the same level as the human agency in, you know, the building of knowledge, but some kind of co-construction maybe, and not just looking down on the animal as an objectified experiment. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And you've
Okay.
answered the question. I had trouble asking it because like I'm thinking of other animal narratives and like I think yours is like animal is tutor, which is interesting because I think your animals
Mm,
have more agency than I'm used to seeing, right? If like the animal is evidence of God, then it's not necessarily a tutor or an agent in itself, right? And so
mm,
there's something very interesting there that you're after that I find fascinating. So it's become a comment
mm,
now. You've answered my
mm.
question.
Thanks. And it's also, I mean, it's not just in discovery narratives, it's also, and that's where it might also connect with what you're looking at, is that some of the animals are also reacting to the waters which are already known. And an example of this is Celia Fiennes, who's giving this fascinating account of her travel through England, and she is visiting lots of spas, and one of them is Harrogate, and a horse refuses, like really literally stops and refuses drinking the water of Harrogate, which I can relate to. I mean the sulphurous one, the sulphur spring. Yes.
Uh, Other questions? I'm still hung up on casual extermination of animals as a trope. And we have to do the chat about like animal properties with blood, which is not water. So let's, in some places, blood becomes water or water blood, whatever. We're sticking the
Mm.
water bit.
No, I heard it's
Yeah,
thicker than water.
it is. It is in fact.
No, but water
Do,
and blood, yeah.
I mean, they are currents. In fact, go on.
No,
You
no,
could
it's just
keep
that
going.
the russet tincture, sorry, I can't say that word, given by the chalybeate waters gives a lot of interpretation as, potential bloods connected to the legends of some saints who had given birth to a specific spring. That's the case of Holywell, but that's also somewhere else, and it's commented upon by medical doctors at the time as, just the actual effect of chalybeate waters and not blood in the mineral waters. But that's not connected to animals, so sorry.
I mean, it's fine. I if I mean, this is the joy of this seminar series is we just go all sorts of wonderful places that I never expected to go 45 minutes ago. Liz Porter has a question. Go ahead, please.
Um, Thank you for this was so interesting. I just have a small question. I was just curious about pigeons in the period that you're looking at. Because I'm thinking of pigeons now, they're almost like the most maligned of birds. They're looked at as kind of dirtier compared to other bird species, I feel like, especially in cities. So I wondered just because it seemed like people were noticing that the pigeons that they were improving perhaps the water, and that was something that was attractive about it. So I just was curious. I didn't know they were used as carrier pigeons, and there's a whole history. So I just didn't know if you could talk a little bit about pigeons in the period.
Well, thank you. I cannot, unfortunately. I mean, yeah, apart from carrier pigeons, I don't know. And thank you for pointing that out. I will definitely investigate. Maybe someone can talk about pigeons, but I have no specific knowledge about them as, and their place in 18th century birds. People still eat them. In France, they do, yes. With green peas.
Not purple, colored in
No,
water that you just
no,
discovered was a
no.
spring.
No, but yeah, but I think, I mean, I'm fascinated by carrier pigeons, especially at a time where we cannot use any so the methods of communication are dwindling. So I think we should go back to them.
Susan has a question. Go ahead, Susan, unmute. Oh,
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Great. I wanted to tell Sophie how much I liked her book on Bath. I recommended it to a number of people, and she has done so much research. So I just wanted to say that it's been very helpful to me. Um,
Thank you.
I was just wondering about the relationship of Bath to some of these smaller ones that you've found. I've looked at all your maps. Many of them are not too far. And is there a reciprocal relationship? Do people, like if there's a miracle or if there's a problem, do they go to Bath, or do people come from Bath, or are
Yes.
these uh, local ones on their own? And if there is a relationship, maybe you could talk about it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your kind words. So I mentioned co-opetition as, there's an obvious economic interest for those smaller towns and smaller spas to open up near Bath because people in Bath might try out some other waters. In fact, in many towns, there would be several springs sometimes that people would try and see what is the effect of the spring and which one actually worked on them. And very often, and that's the case in the Pyrenean, for example, that's another region that I know quite well around Lourdes. You have a lot of mineral waters there. And you can see that not only users, but also medical doctors are trying out the spas on like different spas for the ailment of one person in different ways. For example, some spas are seen as preparatory for a stronger spa, and this would be perhaps the case in the Pyrenean. But the other simple thing was that if one spa didn't work, well, you could go not far from there and try out a different spa. A lot of the smaller spas actually in the treatises that are written about them, very often mention Bath as the spa that didn't work, because they want to target a specific niche of users. And also they want, I guess, to get some more users for whom the spa waters might not have been satisfactory. So there is like a medical discourse of the complementary uses of waters, and also the fact that one water can work when the other cannot. But that's not only economic medical discourse, it's also what users would have said. For example, we have correspondences where people advise each other, okay, I know you've tried the Scarborough waters, but considering what you have, why don't you go to Buxton? This would be much more efficient. So people advise each other, prescribe each other waters, or just longer stays, or ways of using the waters. So yes, they are in competition, but they're also seen as just various types of treatments. And also knowledge and organization of the waters in terms of institutions, you know, the corporations, the master of ceremonies, that would have been often exported from Bath to other places. Bonash was in Bath before he went to Tunbridge, and then at some point he was master of ceremonies in the two places. Some rooms or some urban, how could you say, some architecture around the spa was built in response to the magnificent architecture of Bath. So there are many ways in which all those spas had a form of dialogue with Bath. I'm sorry, this is a bit scattered as a response, but yes, there's a very strong influence of Bath on other spas.
Thank you.
And there was a horse bath in Bath, apparently, as Amanda Herbert, who has done a tremendous set of studies on Bath in the early modern period, has shown.
Okay, so now we've gotten to horse spas. So I think that this is an excellent place. We're hitting the top of the hour, and I know that people have many other things, perhaps waters they must drink,
Yes,
and
please do.
and or not drink or experiment on. I would just like to say that our next seminar will be all about the performance of wonder. It's going to be a 3-person extravaganza in April. So if you haven't signed up yet for that, please check out the website. We'll be having a registration link come out soon. Also, Americans do eat pigeon. It's called squab, or at least they're related. So yeah, we have to name things. It's weird. Just blame the Norman conquest. You'll probably be right. It's pretty much what I'm learning. So I just would like to thank Sophie again for a great talk, and thank all of you so much for coming and your continued support at our 40th ODSECS seminar. We couldn't do it without you, and
Thank you.
it's really wonderful. So
Thank you very much.
take
It
care.
was
One more
great.
round.
And thank you, everyone, for your feedback and questions. They're very helpful. Thank you.